Thanks for joining us on this great day, a day that God has given us. You know what I say. We are to rejoice and to be glad in it. On the Fresh Anointing Show, we have been recognizing April, which is Child Abuse Awareness Month. Our guest today is Justin Perry. He's the owner and founder of Perry Consulting, Healing and Recovering. Welcome to the Fresh Anointing Show, Justin.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Richardson. I appreciate just a chance to be here today.
Oh, yeah, we're glad to have you. As we dive into this topic as we recognize Child Abuse Awareness Month here in April, as we recognize this is a major problem. First of all, I wanted you to kind of take a moment and tell us a bit about your experience with child abuse and what got you started in the field and what drew you to this type of work.
Sure. So, so what I'll probably do is I'll talk about my path into the field and then connect the dots from there. Um, so again, for me, I always tell people again that I didn't necessarily choose this work. I was called to this work, and even though I work as a clinician now, before I sat in the chair, I sat in the couch, and ultimately, what happened was I was in college in what I call my first sophomore year at UNC Chapel Hill, and again, somebody who had been able to kind of navigate difficulties in my life, somebody who had always had strong faith and had been able to persevere and often support others, and found myself in a place where I just couldn't move pretty much. And I fell into what I later realized was a deep depression and significant anxiety, and I was isolating and I was shutting down, and my dorm room basically became both my safe haven and my prison all at once.
Mm.
And I was screening phone calls, I was skipping classes, I was not socializing. The only time I left my room was just to get food from the dining hall. And I did that with a hood on my head, and I came right back to my room and shut back down, until eventually I had a friend that forced me to go eat with her, and I told her what was going on, and she said, "Don't you think you should talk to somebody?" And it was almost like it was the biggest relief. And I went and I talked to the deans at the school, and they basically told me that I could take a medical leave and go work on myself, and I could take some classes in the summer to show that I could actually cut it. And if I could, I could come back. And if not, then I would basically have the memories that I already had. And so I went home and started doing therapy myself. And honestly, when I first went, I still had that mask on, and I was still there trying to impress the therapist that was working with me, and almost thinking like maybe I could get an internship out of this. Again, this is how delusional I was, right? And one day he just looked at me and said, "We're not peers. You're here because you have a problem, and either you get real with that, or you're wasting both of our times." And it forced me to step back and really actually start to look at myself. And in the midst of that, I ended up getting a job at a place, United Family Services, answering phones because I needed something. I was back at home with my parents, and so I was like, I needed to be out of the house, and they needed me to be out of the house. And so luckily I got this job, and a lot of people there had what was called the MSW, a Master's in Social Work degree. And I looked that up. And before that, I had wanted to go into civil rights law. I was always about justice and things like that. And I looked up this thing called the MSW, and it had a clinical piece which you could help people with, but it was rooted in social justice. And it felt like, man, this is created for me. And that shifted my path. And I went back to school. I got A's in classes that I was flunking because I couldn't go to. And I felt like, I want to go in this route. And every summer, I worked in that agency doing camps in Southside and Brook Hill communities in Charlotte. And eventually, when I graduated, just to be sure, before I went to do the MSW, I took my first job after college at Thompson Child and Family Focus. And there we had kids from everywhere. We had kids, from right in the heart of Charlotte. We had kids from rural areas. We had kids from Russian orphanages. And the thing they all shared was that they all had significant trauma. They had felt abuse and neglect from any kind of way you could have thought of. And so for me, it really just kind of opened up my eyes to a whole nother world of just seeing pain in these kids' eyes, but also seeing the opportunity for healing, and working directly with them. And that's what brought me into the work. And it's something that's still rooted in me now, which is even why we named the organization, Counseling, Healing, and Recovery, because those are foundational to what we do every day.
Yeah, yeah. Sounds like a great testimony that you've worked from to get you to where you are now with your your consulting services, healing and recovery. You're the founder and owner, correct?
Correct. Yes, sir.
Yeah, yeah. Now,
Yes,
what
sir.
what type of services do you all offer?
So we do individual, we do group, and we do family therapy for folks that are 13 and up. And in addition to that, we also do public speaking engagements. We do training in organizations and racial equity work. And so, again, one of the things about social work is social work talks about person and environment. And so we look at the individual, but we also look at systems. And so from the way my brain works is that, again, yes, I look at what's going on with a person, but I also know that person is a product of the environment. That person is a product of the systems. That person is a product of strong work of systems, but also breakdowns of systems. And so for us, we look at folks as individuals, but we also look at who else is in your life, what other circumstances in your life, and how do we impact all of these things to help build a sustainable path forward. So again, we have clinicians that we address mental health, we address trauma, we address substance use challenges, and I have one person who also does some work with folks with disordered eating. And so for me, in terms of building this team, one of the things that was important to me was to recognize that I can't do it all, right? But what I can't do, it's important to surround yourself with other folks who can, but also folks who are still rooted in that idea of justice mattering and of holistic healing being important. So,
Yeah, yeah. Now, you say that many of the adults you've treated have been grown up versions of the kids you work with at the beginning of your career. Can you explain what you mean by this and how the impact of child abuse can show up later in adults?
absolutely. It's a great question. So it's interesting. So again, when I first came out of school and I was working at Thompson Child and Family Focus, I was working in the day treatment program, which functioned pretty much as the school, and that's actually where I met Miss Nora and everything else, and so our kids there were between the ages of 5 and 16, and again, I tell people all the time they'd experienced abuse, neglect, and things that would make Law and Order SVU seem like the Disney Channel. Things that you just couldn't even imagine that somebody could go through at any point in life, let alone as a kid. And what I would see is it came out in their behavior, right? And so a lot of people always focus on the behavior, but what I really learned was you have to focus on what's the root of the behavior, because all behavior is an expression of need. And so too often we focus solely on stopping a behavior without figuring out what's the need that's being expressed. And then the behavior just reproduces itself into another challenging behavior. And so the other thing I realized in my time there was that, a lot of the challenges that the kids had were often rooted in challenges from their parents, challenges from the adults. And so in order for me to really be able to do sustainable work, I needed not only to understand kids, but I needed to understand adults. And so when I went to grad school, I made a point that I wanted to do more work with adults so I could understand their parents. One of the other things I realized was that a lot of my kids also had parents who had challenges with addiction. And so I had the opportunity to do a substance abuse certificate as part of my program. And so while I was doing what we have to do with, they call them field placements or internships, I would go places and I would say to folks, well, I want to work with the people who have both mental health and substance use challenges. And they were like, sure. And I was like, well, that's too easy. Like, well, clearly there's a reason why when they're saying yes to you that easily, well, clearly it's because there's challenges, right? But again, when I would start talking to folks about their lives before they were 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 or 25, what I kept hearing was similar stories to those same 5-year-olds, that same 9-year-old, that same 12-year-old that I've been working with at Thompson. And so what I realized in my work was that when we're talking about this, a lot of folks have what we call arrested development, which means that when your brain is in the midst of constant trauma, when your brain is in the midst of constant addiction and things like that, even though my body is still growing, my brain development, the way my emotions are managed, the way I understand myself, the way my relationships function, those things are not growing at the same rate that my body is, right? So chronologically, I may be 35, but developmentally, I'm still 14. And it would make me think about some of the kids that I worked with, because I worked with a kid who was a 12-year-old, and they seem so mature. They seem so on point, and you don't feel like, I'm not even sure why this kid is in my program right now. But when they got triggered by something that seemed traumatic again, they would go right back into that 5-year-old place. And because that was where the trauma started, and they had never had a chance to work through that. And so what I started learning was it's important to operate not based on somebody's chronological age, how many years you've been on earth. I got to help meet you at your developmental age, your level of functioning. And so when I was working with a lot of my adults, again, I was taking the same skills that I had learned in terms of connecting with the kids, in terms of helping them heal that inner child and doing that work with the adults. And I started seeing better results.
You brought up a very good point. I think that sometimes we overlook, and that is you got to get to the root of the matter. And I can remember working in the yard, cut down this tree. I didn't want the tree anymore, but I cut it down, but I did not get to the root of the tree. And before I knew it, the tree was growing back again.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, how important is it for adults or for people that has gone through these challenges in life to really get help? Because if, as you said, if we don't get to the root of the matter, it's just going to continue in that same process, and we don't get the healing, we don't get the delivery or the deliverance from
Mm-hmm.
this challenge that's inhibiting us from living our best life.
Absolutely. I mean, it's fundamental. Um, you know, hurt kids who've been traumatized become hurt adults who've been traumatized. Then have kids who, if I've not necessarily been able to heal a lot of my trauma, a lot of that can indirectly be passed down to my kids, right? And so again, I I do my best. One, that I'm a parent of a 7-year-old and 4-year-old myself, and so I realize how humbling that is. But I really do my best not to sit in judgment of parents, because again, we're grown-up versions of the little kids, right? And so again, a lot of us have these things that have not been addressed in our lives, and sometimes we may even be able to kind of skip over them, not realize. But when you have children, it brings out vulnerabilities in you that you never even realized you had, right? And it taps back into some of that same stuff that was never addressed. And so I always say you got to tell on your disease, or your disease will tell on you. And so in a way, very often what happens is, Dr. J, is that again, we have this adult, and now I'm raising this kid. And even though my goal was not to become my mom or dad or whoever raised me, the mind may try to forget, but the body doesn't. And that's, I'm perpetuating the exact same things that I didn't want to perpetuate, the things that I hated from my own childhood, but I'm doing it almost on autopilot. And so part of the work is really helping folks step back, one, to recognize that, but then two, step back to figure out, how do I stop beating up on myself, stop judging myself, And even when it comes to my family, my parents, it doesn't mean I don't hold them accountable, but at the same time, I'm trying to figure out how do I wrap my head around the fact that more than likely they did the best they could with what they knew at the time.
Right.
And my goal now is to learn better, to do better for my kid so that they start off a little bit better than I did. And then when they have a kid, they can start off a little bit better than they did. And I'm not even talking about just from an economic standpoint. Most of the time, people talk about doing better for my kids than was done for me. Most of the time, we're talking economics, and absolutely, that's important, right? But I'm talking about from a psychological, emotional, and spiritual place. You
Yeah.
know, how do I help my kid not have to do as much healing in adulthood as I did? And so again, then their kid starts at another place. But again, we can't do that until we truly have honest conversations about how we got to where we are, what brought us to where we are, but what brought our parents to where they were. You know, because again, these things tend to happen in cycles.
Yeah, that's another good point too, because it runs. Sometimes it runs from generation to generation and it keeps on running unless we, uh, as that saying goes, unless we nip it in the bud and we stop it. We have to stop it somewhere, or else it's going to keep running like a vine. If you let that vine run,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to keep running, and before you know it, it's out of control. Now,
Yeah.
you say that boys aren't given a full menu of emotions early, and it harms them and us all later. Tell us, what do you mean by that?
Sure. So, excuse me. You know, I think, you know, it's very interesting. Like I hear people say things all the time. They say, you know, men are rational and women are emotional. And I'm always like, I don't know what world you live in, but I was like, men are highly emotional, right? We're just often destructively emotional, you know. So I mean, if you look at shootings and killings and mass shoot everything else, you know, people talk about mental health. I always say all the time, there's many women with mental health challenges as there are men. But the people doing mass shootings and doing most of the gun violence are all men, right? And doing that is an emotional act. That's not a rational act. So the idea that men are rational and not emotional is a myth. We're just not really given the opportunity to be equipped to be able to do that in a constructive way. So what you find is little boys, again, we're allowed to be excited, you know, you know, we can be happy, but not too happy, right? Um, and then if it's uncomfortable, the only emotion that little boys are allowed to be, part of my French, is to be pissed off,
Mm,
right? And and so what we often talk about is that anger is often a secondary emotion, and the truth is underneath that anger is an emotion that's much more vulnerable. But again, we don't teach little boys how to be vulnerable in a comfortable way early on. So they learn anger, they learn rage,
mm,
but they're not taught to be comfortable being sad, being hurt, being embarrassed, you know, being scared. Because the truth is, that's what's underneath that anger. And it comes out, the anger is the shield, right? And
right.
so I can't sit there, I can't look at you and say, hey, Dr. J, wow, you know, when you said this, that actually hit me in the gut, that hurt. I got to punch you. You know, because I don't want to say that thing because that's soft, right? You know, we say stuff like that, that's soft. But again, so then what happens is we raise a whole half of the population who doesn't actually know how to deal with these uncomfortable emotions. So again, we either get high or we get drunk, we get destructive,
Mm,
we hold it in and have heart attacks. We do all these kinds of things. And so again, that's why when you look at the pathway forward, while we're teaching girls to have conversations and to build relationships that are authentic with, again, not to say there's not challenges still there, but they're doing some of these things. Very often for boys, it's how long can you hold it in, and then how do you explode later on? And again, I say that as somebody myself, who I was somebody who I was great at stuffing my feelings. And when I was younger, I would explode in certain ways. And then I got older and I was holding it in. And again, if I think about what was going on with me in college, deal, right? It was shame,
mm,
you know, and it was shame. And it was the fact that I felt like I was letting people down. I was disappointing my community. I was disappointing my church, my family, everybody else. But I couldn't just say that. I went in isolation mode, you know? And so again, going back to that whole telling your disease is telling you, well, now all of a sudden you've not been to class in 3 months and you got a transcript full of zeros. So my disease was telling on me, even though I was doing my best not to let anybody know about it. And so when I talk about this, when we look at things like domestic violence, when we look again at the amount of killing we see in our communities and everything else, what we've got is often a lot of boys who have feelings they don't know how to deal with, who have shame they don't know how to deal with, that we've not equipped them. And so in the end, not only does it harm them, but it harms everybody. The number one folks who lead in terms of completed suicide across the board in every race is men.
Yeah.
So again, that's also an emotional thing. So we've got to get real about these conversations and equipping our boys to deal with these uncomfortable feelings. So as men, we can figure out how to constructively deal with these things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're here talking with Justin Perry. He's the owner and founder of Perry Consulting, Healing and Recovering. Uh, Justin, would you give the people that might need your services your contact information, phone number, how they can get in contact with you if they know somebody or themselves need some of your services?
Absolutely. So first, the phone number is 704-908-4061. Again, that's 704-908-4061. We also, you can go directly to our website, which is justinperrycounseling.com. So again, that's justinperrycounseling.com. You can just go straight on there, and there's a page on there that says contact us. And you can look on there. Each clinician has a profile where you can get to know them a little bit. They can tell you a little bit about what they work with, and you can send a message directly through to contact us, and it'll go through. And my office assistant, Barjan Lee, who is a certified peer support specialist, which means she's dealt with mental health challenges herself, is the person who will reach out. And one of the things we're committed to doing is we're committed to helping make sure somebody gets connected. And so obviously, if it can be done with us, great. That's always the first goal. But even if it can't be done with us, then we will look to try to connect you with somewhere else as well. Because what's most important to us is that people get the help they need. You know, there's not a shortage of need out here. Sometimes there's a shortage of courage to reach out for the need, where to go to get that need met. So again, come to the website, justinperrycounseling.com. Give us a call, 704-908-4061. We also have a Facebook page, this is Justin Perry Counseling, and Perry Counseling Healing and Recovery, and then also an Instagram account, it's Justin Perry Counseling. And so if for some reason you're connected there, you can send a LinkedIn, send a direct message. And the last thing is I'm on LinkedIn as well, just as Justin Perry. So again, there's a lot of ways you can find us. Feel free, or just Google Justin Perry and it'll come up as well. All right.
Once again, we're talking with Justin Perry, owner and founder of Perry Consulting, Healing and Recovery. We have about 2 minutes left, and I have one more question, and I know you can't answer this to the extent that it needs to be answered, but if you could do it for me in 2 minutes, I would greatly appreciate it. When it comes to Black and other children of color, what do you see as the unique circumstances they face in the mental health system and society overall when it comes to child abuse?
All right, I'll move quick. It's a deep question as well, right?
I know it, man. I know it.
No, I can go on, right? So the challenge we face is that our the same way as our white counterparts. Again, what I've learned in my work in the field, working across the board in various communities, is that everybody bleeds, but everybody's blood is not respected the same. And very often for our children, they are not allowed to be children for as long as their white peers. And very often they're not seen with the same innocence. Even from a diagnostic standpoint, I've seen what I would call harsher diagnoses for Black boys and Black girls than I've seen for white boys and white girls. And when we look at school discipline, same kind of thing. And so I think it's really important that we take a more trauma informed, but also a healing centered approach to our children, because again, we're often talking about generational trauma that's never been recognized as such. And what we don't want to do is to perpetuate it and double down by being harsh on them. I think we really can love our kids and give them what we call compassionate accountability. But we also have to challenge the system to say, hey, our kids are still kids, even if you're intimidated by the reality. They're just dealing with the same things their white peers are, but they just happen to have more melanin.
Yeah, yeah. Once again, Justin, thanks for being a part of the Fresh Anointing Show. Hopefully, we get you back here sometime in the near future. You're doing a great work. Keep it up. And I would ask that those that are listening, those that are viewing this vodcast or podcast, that if you know someone that's in need, would you please pass this on to them, family and friends, or even if it's yourself? Don't hesitate to get in contact with Perry Consulting, Healing and Recovering. They will be glad to help you. Whatever the matter is, they can help you or assist you to get the help that you need. Well, until next time, may the Lord bless you.